We are lighting the candle, a world that works. And I am Bill Correll. I'm here with one of my favorite people on the planet, Jan Jeremias. She's somebody that I hold in high esteem.
Sorry.
Other people like you too. Anyway, so here's the thing. Some things have been going on. You've done a little bit of traveling. How is your Jewish New Year going?
Oh, okay. It's always an interesting time of year, Jewish New Year, for because in general, it's a very sort of contemplative, very, Rosh Hashanah is a little bit more celebratory, but this whole period, which we call the days of awe,
Yeah.
from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, are quite reflective. And, it's all about forgiveness, forgiving yourself, asking forgiveness of others. If you believe in God or whatever source, universe, your higher power, asking forgiveness from that, or kind of taking ownership of the things that didn't work and the things that did. And, so it's a little bit, it's always an interesting time of year as I usually take it pretty seriously. And
Yeah.
that's always, and I always smile because my mother's always like, I'll be so happy when it's over. Because it's like kind of it's like if you take it seriously. But it's been very nice to be with her. I've been down with her, so that's been really nice. And um, so yeah, so just nice. I love spending time with her, and so I feel very blessed and lucky to be able to do so. So
So, where in the three-dimensional universe would you place yourself right this moment?
uh,
Where's Jan?
where's Jan? Um, I am on that kind of very pensive kind of thought area of my, of looking back over the past year and reflecting on what I see benefit, what I like, even just in my own life, what I've seen that benefits my life, what I've seen that doesn't benefit my life. Um, and not even necessarily, it's much more in like, mindset and in managing my emotions and like things like that is what I'm looking at, not in this sort of berating like okay, you didn't do this kind of thing, or you said this was your goal and you didn't fulfill that goal, not that kind of thing, much more in what we talk about here, which is managing my life and managing how I am in the world and my contribution to the world. And so that's really where I've been. That's where our Jan is today, as far as that goes. But I really, what's on my mind today is really this story I had heard, and I've just been sitting with it for. And I mean, you might have heard it before, Bill, because like you tend to when I bring it up, you're like, oh yeah, I know that story. So, but it's about Art Garfunkel and his friend Sandy Greenberg.
Yes.
And so I read a beautiful rendition of that story. And I think I was just struck by really, I've been spending a lot of time, as I always do, but more so, I think, these days, of almost cocooning myself into, or feeding myself is a better way, feeding myself positivity. And this was just truly an inspirational story to me. And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, okay. That's, and so I'm kind of drawing to myself more examples like that and trying to live the world through those eyes versus live the world through, you know, glasses or rose-colored glasses that are not so beautifully tinted. Let's just say that.
So funny enough, I had actually seen a Facebook meme that was about 300 words talking about how Art had this relationship with this older man throughout his career and how close they were. And I thought they were going to talk about, some relationship to Paul Simon, but far from it. This was just kind of like his source to go to get recreated. And when it got closer to, maybe you can tell your takeaways from the story, but we'll share that with the folks at home so they've got a little bit more access to where you are in the universe.
Sure. So the story that I read, or the story that I'm coming up with, is actually he was not older. Sandy Greenberg went to Columbia with him,
Fair enough.
and when he went to Columbia, he had something go on with his eyes, and he went blind.
Right.
And Sandy Greenberg, Art Garfunkel committed to him, said they were the best of friends, and said, um, I am going to basically be your eyes for you. So he like took him to all his classes. He navigated the world with him, and his nickname was Darkness, as an empathy, like a word of empathy for his friend who had gone blind, which is where the title of the song "Hello Darkness, My Old Friend" came from,
Right.
which gives me chills when I say it. And how he did that. He went around and he went to all his classes. And there is one story where he actually takes him to Grand Central one day. They're going through Grand Central, and he just leaves him there to navigate his way home. And he ends up getting off at the train stop at like 116th Street, and Art Garfunkel's there. But really, he was there the whole time. He was just following him so that he could learn how to be independent. And um, but goes on to say that all of a sudden, when Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel got together and they decided they wanted to cut a record, Art said he needed $400, and he called Sandy Greenberg and said, and literally he had, from what I read, he had $406 in his bank account, and he gave Art Garfunkel 400 of them.
Yes.
And just that relationship of, basically how much he adjusted his life for his friend, and how I read some pretty elaborate stories about, what he did for him. And just to me, it was like, I don't know, it brought tears to my eyes. I just thought it was the most beautiful thing that he basically said, you can't hermitize, which is what I'd heard, that, Sandy Greenberg went home to Buffalo, and after he was diagnosed, and I guess when he was the beginning of his blindness, and Art Garfunkel went to the house and said, I can't let you sit here. And I just thought, wow, to have somebody kind enough and that loved him basically so much to be able to do that was just like, sorry, I get all teary. I just like,
I'm with you. You just completely put to shame my recollection of my Facebook meme. You know, I knew the blindness part, but I did not realize that they were the same age. And the picture that they showed actually made Sandy look much older than Art was in the picture. So, long story short, I'd like to get your source so I can fill in the blanks over here. And that, I'm totally unsatisfied with what I saw on Facebook and my recollection of it now.
now I'm really curious because supposedly the excerpt I read, and then I read an interview, I think it was with Sandy Greenberg, but supposedly it comes from his memoir, which was Hello, Darkness, My Old Friend: How Daring Dreams and Unyielding Friendship Turned One Man's Blindness into an Extraordinary Vision for Life.
I'll
And
probably look for that on Audible and get it downloaded after we're done here.
yeah, so I was like, "Oh, okay. I wanna get that book and read, firsthand," partly because I always loved their music, and I guess that sometimes you don't understand the meaning behind certain songs or
Right.
the titles of songs, just like you don't understand, I mean, I'm a big poetry fanatic, and I've heard poets talk about their poetry and how different it is from from the meaning I would take from it. So sometimes to realize like the true meaning of the song, or now to go back and listen to the song with sort of different ears, knowing the story, and then now wanting to read the lyrics and say, okay, you
Yeah.
know, so powerful, and reminds me of people that we really don't know. Like, I mean, I thought he was a great singer and I loved his music. I loved Simon and Garfunkel, but I don't know that I ever knew that about him. And so it just gave me a different feeling and appreciation of who he was,
Right.
who he is.
Yeah, I'm with you. I didn't even realize that he went to Columbia to be, completely out there. And at the same time, when you stop and think about, they got together. I want to say in like 1957 was when uh, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel they had an act called um, Tom and Jerry first, I believe, was what their stage name was before they got to the 1960s. And then they went from singing, like Jimmy Darren type stuff and, things, it might have been 58, 59, or 60, somewhere around there, when everybody, including Leon Russell and everybody in the world, all looked clean cut and wore suits. And
Right.
the next thing you know, Paul Simon is writing "I Am a Rock," and some other things there that were just like they were like if Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie got together and wrote some songs and had the kind of sophistication that somebody like old Bob would have had as he came along. Uh, all of a sudden, Paul Simon is like really turning out great stuff in the the folk music genre. And I'm with you. The song that's the Sounds of Silence um, is so, as far as I'm concerned, it's reflective of what the changes they were seeing in that time frame were, but they were so predictive of where
Mhm.
people would go in the future, especially the things like the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they'd made,
Yeah.
and we're living that to an extreme right now. I think where Paul and Art were operating, they saw that, in the music and in the entertainment industry where people really didn't have morals and scruples and that sort of thing. And at the same time, I bet you nobody in the late 50s, early 60s, or even the mid 60s thought we would ever change our culture to the degree that we have.
Mhm, mhm. I agree with you. I'm just looking up, so it says, they were I mean, they refer to Tom and Jerry, they say that was 1956 to 1958,
Yep.
and then, and then they became Simon in England, Garfunkel in college, but, I mean, that was, like, the early 1960s. I mean, Sound of Silence came out in '65.
Right. But
So,
read when he wrote it. It may have been written earlier than that. That's when they got the money to record it.
right,
I'm
right,
with
no,
you on that.
absolutely. Um, it says they were one of the best-selling music acts of the 1960s, and then it lists most of the recordings. I'll go, yeah, they recorded in March of '64, but I don't know.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing. I wanna say The Graduate.
Mhm.
Paul, wrote several songs,
Yes.
and this one, they this timing was just perfect because he got discovered, and then they were using, that song, and he wrote Mrs. Robinson and some of the other great staples that we know of those guys. And unfortunately, what happened after that is they sort of spent themselves on Bridge Over Troubled Water, and then they kind of drifted apart. And before you knew it, Paul was going this whole different direction, writing things that were kind of like comedic, me and Julio and Cecilia and that sort of thing. And there was I think, a blessed coming together between those two men in terms of how their voices and the poetry and the music all worked together, in a magical sort of a way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there really was, and yeah, and it's so interesting because, like you said, Paul became somewhat like had all these other things he did, and some of them quite um successful. And then you didn't hear that much about Art Garfunkel.
Right.
Um, as far as once they say, once they split up a little bit, but not nearly as much. Like Paul was very present, let's say,
Right.
and you didn't hear, but there was something very sacred and very heartfelt, I think, in
Yes.
in their union.
Yeah, they did reunite, I want to say in the early 1980s for a concert in Central Park. I didn't see it, but I know people that were there, and they said even though the acoustics were not as good as they would have been, like at Madison Square Garden or another indoor venue, they said that the evening was blessed. That anybody that was sort of my age, and I'm a lot older than you are, would have immediately been taken back to their early 20s or late teens back in the 1960s.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, so just yeah, so I was thinking about stories like that, I guess, is where my mind's been going lately,
Sure.
or just, of people that do, grand gestures, like, I would consider that a grand gesture of kindness to people who, we always end our podcast with, you always end, like, reach out to somebody,
Yeah.
to small acts, like everyday acts where you ripple out. Maybe I've been, like I said, focused there because I feel like, the exact opposite would be to focus on the negative, which is very easy to do these days.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
pointless too, right? To
yeah,
focus on the negative, I mean, you need to appreciate it's there and acknowledge it and not be Pollyannish about it. But at the same time, it's not where you want to dwell. You don't want to hang out there, like fretting it, or because the fact of the matter is that it disappears the moment that you allow it to be present. Now you can create something better and stronger and faster and great.
well, and as you say that, I think about, I was listening or, to someone who was talking about, the underlying current in our world, because it really is a global thing of negativity, of anxiety, of stress. And,
Mhm.
she was saying that, it used to be that you read the newspaper and in the morning. Like I remember every day my father got the Hartford Current, like every day, he would read, at breakfast, he would read the front page, he would read the sports section,
Sure.
and then he always read the obits. That was just, he always read the obituaries.
Yeah.
So, and then, maybe it came home, and at the end of the day, once we had a TV, there was one TV in the living room. He would watch the 11 o'clock news, I think it was.
Right.
But otherwise, during the day, you really didn't hear what was going on at all.
Right.
And this person was talking about the fact that, if you think about all the alarms we have on our phones of like news flashes and the constant like streaming of different news channels, like, I have people I know who watch the news 24 hours a day. Basically, every waking hour, they have it on in the background.
Yes.
And I'm sitting and she commented that no wonder everybody is sort of on emotional overload,
Right.
just overstimulated because there's never any space time. There's never any quiet time.
Right.
And if it is like, I mean, I have stuff on in the background a lot of the time, but it's not heavy stuff. It might be music, it might be podcasts, it might be just, it might be TV or a movie, but it's not going to be heavy. And I feel like no wonder people are just so, I don't know, almost besides themselves.
Right.
Um, because that's the space they live in all the time.
Well, there's something really remarkable about us talking about Rosh Hashanah today, and I think I am lovingly referred to by many of my Jewish friends as the gentle Gentile. Okay, And I love everybody. And what I really love is history. And I love the fact that just by saying that this is the Hebrew New Year, and then it kind of implies like the Hebrew calendar, we're in year, I don't know, what, 54 something or other. Do you know the year?
5735.
57. I was kind of, I was going to guess close to that. You would have given me a big gold star on the middle of my forehead. So the point is that we're really, I mean, the Jewish New Year, the Hebrew New Year is referential back to the garden, as I understand it. This was talking the creation story in Genesis. We're talking about time since then. And if that doesn't give you goosebumps, to like relate to, we're now talking going on 6,000 years that people are saying that our history, especially the religious aspects of it, are referential to that. Like we got made on a particular date, and if you want to celebrate something, I don't know if Genesis is at the top of a lot of people's list, but you got to consider it. I mean, just for a moment, give thanks to that thing where, how did we get here? There was an Adam and Eve. And I don't care what you believe, this isn't about a belief, this is more about, like, just honor the fact that we're here because something really cool got started a long time ago. I mean, greater than anyone's memory, and it has to have been documented in all these wonderful books, you know?
Right. I was reading something and, and I shared it with my mother because it wasn't something I had ever heard of. It was something I thought about, but I never really looked into. So the fact, if you look at Genesis and creation,
Yes.
first there was darkness and then light was created.
Yep.
And almost in general, the Jewish holidays, even from the smaller ones, there's maybe two fasts, which are like an exception. But in general, they all start at night
Yep.
and then they go into the day. For this whole idea is, from darkness, good comes, from dark times, from endings come new beginnings. Like,
Yes.
and I thought, wow, I never realized that was the reason. It was like, I mean, I've been, I grew up this way, but I don't know that I ever really asked the question. And I thought to myself, wow, that is, I guess, because even in yoga, we talk a lot about, the whole cycle of everything, beginnings going into endings and, and just the fact I was like, oh my gosh. And then when he said Genesis and he said, if you look at creation,
Yes.
first darkness was created or darkness was, and then from that light was created. And I was like, whoa, this is really deep. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Think about this candle that we're passing along. This dude's been passed around for a millennia, or 6 millennia at this point, like staying inside of the story. But it's wonderful if you stop for a moment and you just kind of honor the fact that these traditions, of course, my logical mind goes, what year did they decide that it was the a year from creation? I got a feeling they weren't actually paying attention to time all that much in the early days. They kind of got up, sunrise, sunset, like the song in Exodus, right? And you think about it from the standpoint of what we know about Christianity, that the books that are in the New Testament are a construct. And for somebody who was a Roman, Constantine, who worshipped all of these gods, he marries a Christian woman and makes her his queen, and she's taking the Christians to heart here, and say, like, we got to do something about this and make this thing so that it's repeatable and pass onable, because we got all these disjointed books. So the convention of Nicaea, and they all sat down, and who knows what they looked at and how many years that may have gone on. But this was roughly, the traditions say that it was roughly 400 years after the time of Christ. And so now we've got all these wonderful things that have been put together, and they are traditions that we can honor, not because they're true or not true. That's beside the point. It's because people thought it was important enough at some point or another to codify it. And we're talking about generations of stories being passed verbally,
Mhm.
kind of like Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey. Was there ever a guy really named Homer? We don't know. All we know is those stories that are so close to each other, really. I mean, in terms of plot line and the Jason and the Argonauts and all the rest. There's always heroes,
Mhm.
and mythology and all that sort of thing. But where we are right now in this world,
Yeah,
I
go
mean,
ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, those allowed people to test the direction of their personal compass.
Mhm. Yeah, I was talking to my mom about that because if you look at even the biblical stories and the stories that you read um on Rosh Hashanah, or the
Right.
parts of the Bible, I should say, the parts of the Bible you read on Rosh Hashanah, which are about creation, and then it goes into Sarah and Hagar and the fact that Abraham basically, you know, has to choose between both, one or the other, and then goes into the sacrifice of when he's asked to sacrifice Isaac. And so all of a sudden, and all these things about like, if you think about what they kind of instill, like this idea of faith and the fact that, he had faith in something greater than himself, willing enough to, if you take the story literally, that he was willing to sacrifice his own child because he was told to, whether you agree with that or not, this whole idea of having that much faith in something, in a source, in a God, um, to basically not, especially after you've been barren and you can't have children, to sit there and say, okay, well, I'm gonna, God said I should do this, and I'm gonna, whether you believe he should have done, like he should have gone that far or not, just to
Yeah.
kind of think about those ideas. Or the fact of you like look at the personalities and the fact of like, you know, the whole idea of like choosing between two women or two sons and what that must have been like, and also the humanness of them, as much as they were sort of biblical, and they're, we consider them in Judaism, especially, we consider them as holy people, like they're the forefathers and the foremothers, you know, and all the prayers refer to them and talk about them. And so, but they were also human beings,
Yeah.
and they had these human traits, which were just like our traits. They got jealous, they got angry, they, you know, they,
I mean, good Lord, look at Cain and Abel. That got off
I
to a
know
rough
exactly,
start.
Cain and Abel, or Joseph and his brothers, where he was like,
Yeah.
sold, kind of thing. And so all of a sudden you realize, are Miriam and her brothers, Moses and Aaron, and sitting there, and the fact that, it's always so interesting because it's kind of like, well, no matter what, they were still human beings. Like they still
Yes.
had all those human, which I think is, on a more modern term, it reminds me of like, like the Wizard of Oz, where like all the qualities of those characters that we possess, or other stories where like, like you mentioned, the Iliad and the Odyssey, or Shakespeare, where all of a sudden you realize the different roles they play. But
Right.
really, it's always just a way for people to relate in some form and recognize that, like, at times I can be a big, pain in in the ass, and then other time, and that's just being a human being.
I was going to say, turns out that's kind of normal.
Right, exactly, exactly. Yeah,
A
and
PETA.
so
We call that a PETA. Yeah.
right, so I think that that's where it gets to be really interesting to me, is like if you go and you look at a lot of different cultures and a lot of different, you know, religions, or, and I'm not the biggest authority on other religions, but the similarities and the stories and everything are just so interesting to me.
Sure.
And the repetitiveness, like the fact, the commonalities between them all, which I like to focus on, whether that be repetition in certain numbers that have significance across, like, or I was talking to, I think I was talking to a friend of mine. We were talking about the whole idea of water, like, in Judaism, like on Rosh Hashanah, we go to Tashlich, where we actually take pieces of bread and we throw it in water, throwing away our sins or throwing away stuff we don't need. But the whole idea of like the holiness of water.
Yeah. The Catholics took that to a different level. They call that confession,
Right.
which
Confession.
becomes addictive, and you need to have a disinterested party who can give you absolution after you've taken your piece of bread and thrown it on the water. At the end of it, of the whole thing, no matter what you did, the priest always has to say, okay, you are forgiven your sins, say an act of contrition, and in your case, go do 7,000 Hail Marys and about 9,000 Our Fathers, and when you've finished with that, come back and see me and I'll give you more.
But
I
this
got a
whole
question for
yeah,
you.
go ahead. Yeah.
So, all right, so there's something kind of cool. Both of us got a view into our religion through another language, me through Latin and you through Hebrew, right? Because your ritual for coming of age in bat mitzvah is the whole recitation and reading, from of scriptures. uh, and what was that like for you? Did you find yourself where you were understanding the Hebrew words, or did you kind of translate that, while you were going through it? I mean, that's an arduous task for a 12-year-old to go through, right? To
Yeah, I
learn
mean,
those words. And,
I have to share that I didn't have like Orthodox Jewish girls don't have a traditional bas mitzvah. I mean,
no, they don't.
we don't. It's still that whole very much that whole thing that women don't sing in public. And so we had like a little, we had it's never as big a, at least in Orthodox Judaism, it's, at least when I was growing up, it was never as big a deal as, let's say, a bar mitzvah
Right.
and for a boy. And there are certain things that I mean, a lot of the laws all of a sudden change. Like if you didn't need to fast before, once you reach bas mitzvah, you now need to fast, things like that. And there are other sort of customs that you might have depending on where you come from, like whether you're Eastern European or European, Ashkenazi Jewish or Sephardi, Spanish origin. But some of those customs might differ. But for as far as I was concerned, there really wasn't a whole, like, I didn't have to. As far as reading prayers now, though, I can read Hebrew. I mean, I grew up, I went to school, I can read Hebrew quite well. And I can get a lot of the gist. As far as the true meaning, a lot of times of the prayers, I'll read them, and sometimes at points I'll go back and I'll read them in English just because I want to get a better grasp and I want to sort of, let's say, when I say own, I want to own what I'm saying. Like I want to understand what I'm saying
Sure.
so I can like basically embody it. Like I can understand it and say, okay, this is what I'm atoning for. This is what it's saying.
Yes.
And in all transparency, a lot of my views of a lot of the prayers have changed through the years because they're very um berating and sort of like, I don't know, just very much like I'm going to be punished, and this is, and everything that's bad that happens to you is because you must have sinned kind of attitude. And as I just became more spiritual, I think I kind of began to question a lot of that and sort of read a lot more modern translations of a lot of the prayers now, as opposed to what I would say more historical translations.
Well, the archaic, almost anything was about making the reader bad and wrong, from the get go. Okay. Original sin for Catholics, and I, don't know too much about where the, but there's cultural Jewish guilt, which you come by honestly as well, right?
Oh,
And nobody
yes.
ever has a big problem with that, other than to sometimes make light of it a little bit, or to just recognize when it's running them, and it's not something that it's not. So when you read something that's written in more modern, gentler terms, and it's inviting you to a life that's different than the one that you would have if you weren't reading the prayers. I like that myself, and I'm not sure exactly what you're saying the differences are, but for me, it's kind of like guitar hymns, versus the old Lutheran stuff and things that go back to Calvin, and the old standby saws that are in every hymnal, because there's, I don't know, 400 hymns in a hymnal or whatever it is. But there are some that give light, and there are some that give life, and there are some that give both, in my opinion. And
Mhm. I mean, the tunes are beautiful and in themselves, like, create this feeling of, I wanna say, like, awe and just I maybe because I grew up with them, but they all have this kind of very certain melodic tone to them. Maybe it's like a seriousness to them
yeah,
that is just wow. And, you hear them, and some of them I now take them as very, I take them differently than I did, let's say when I was 13 or 15 or 16 and reading them,
right.
as and still obviously I have the feeling of like, the feeling of like, oh my gosh, do I take this literally? Like just because I grew up that way. So I'll share with you this one, which is very famous. Um, and it's a poem. I'm trying to, and it's read both days of Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur. And in it, it literally goes through like, on this day, God will decide like who will live and who will die, and how they will die. Like, will
Hope
they
he's
be
having a good
stoned?
hope he's having a good day, right?
Right. Will it be by stoning? Will it be by fire? Will it
Oh,
be by
yeah.
water? Like really descriptive. And I remember standing there, like literally when I was a kid thinking to myself, like, oh shoot, like this is kind of like very scary kind of thing, like on this
Ooh,
day. And so this feeling of like, oh my, and so I guess as I get older, or it was like, even as a kid, it was like the monumentalness, like the largeness of this. If I took this seriously, like this was a really big deal. And the fact that there's a day in your lot, like, for us, or maybe multiple days where you actually really look at the actions that you did. Like, and
right,
you kind of sit there and say, well, in this occasion, I probably could have been more upfront or a little bit more honest openly, or I didn't handle this the best way. And not in a critical way, because we usually, none of us, most of us don't have ill intent. It's much more we're coming from a place of fear, of insecurity,
right.
of doubt, like, and to kind of look at that. So I think I now look at it like that, like, like, okay, I did this and I might have done it for a good reason, but, you know, can I do better?
Yeah. And I think that's healthy, to take a moment and put some kind of a backwards scrutiny on your behavior. And in many cases, I don't know about you, but I have things where I did things in an unthinking kind of a way, and they're sins of omission more than they are of commission. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people lose sleep over the things that they weren't awake for, and really wish that they had behaved differently in that time than they did. And in many cases, I mean, obviously there's nothing you can do about going backwards, but it's kind of nice every once in a while to sweep it away and kind of you know uh, clean the the front window on your car. When your windshield is clean, you can drive, faster. And so clean that son of a gun off and get yourself back on the road. And the other thing I want to just mention to you is I should have you around more than I do. This once a week ain't working for me because I need you there so I can say shit out loud that I think I know, and then you can tell me what's really going on in the world. I appreciate that about you.
Thank you. Well, I just pulled out some because I was trying to get a bet, like just so there's a book out and I haven't read the book, but it's called, like I mentioned, Who by Fire and Who by Water.
Right,
And it says, all of us have done, this is by the author, I guess, all of us have done or omitted to do things we regret and fallen short of what would be morally ideal. For many
right,
of us, these may be ongoing patterns of behavior. Some may stifle their consciousness of wrongdoing and bury it deep within, while others may be well aware and overwhelmed with guilt and despair. Judaism has long provided a process by which we can atone for our sins and start afresh in the eyes of God and ourselves.
right,
In repentance, the meaning and practice of repentance, or the Hebrew word is teshuvah, um, it begins by identifying repentance as one of the central religious moral teachings of Judaism and takes this rigorous analytical approach to understanding what repentance is and how it is done. I mean, and by us, it says it's by, I'm Kippur, that one of the prayers talks about it being by prayer or meditation, however you want to label it,
right.
um, by fasting. And that's why we fast as a form of like repentance and purging and kind of getting down to our basic needs. And then the other one is by charity or works, yeah, acts of kindness. And so those are the three ways they say if you wanted to, like, let's say if, as we call it, God's decree of like live or death, if you want to reverse the decree, those are the three things that will reverse is the fact that you atone, you kind of own what you've done. You
Yeah,
realize, let you get back to your basic values of what's important.
I
And
love yeah, I love the word atone. It's like 2 words, at one, you
I
know?
talked about that the other day. I say atonement is actually at one meant.
Yes, exactly. You are a little bit disintegrated, and the integration process is very important to get back on top of your game and to be fully in life. But I like the decision, am I gonna live from this moment, or am I gonna live like I'm living, or am I gonna live like I'm dying, you know?
Mhm.
And figuratively and literally, there's something really great about choosing, like declaring for yourself. No one else will do it for you.
And I love they use that word, Bill, choosing or choice, because I think so much of the time, or well, all the time, it is a choice. I mean, you
Yes.
talked about like whether we want to sit in the negativity or the news and that bombardment and sit there. And it's a choice to turn it off and to say, I can, but I always say I'm the adult here, you know, and I can turn this off, I don't, and I think that there's something no matter where we are, we can choose to dwell or we can choose to move forward. We can choose how we're going to act or how we're going to be in any given opportunity or situation.
Yes.
And it's all about, when it's a choosing.
I love what you're saying. And I want you to also join me in understanding that there are few people that actually understand the words coming out of your mouth right now. Simply because for so many of us, how life went was this is how it is. It's just this way. And there's no alternative to it. It's just how it is, and it's going to keep going this way. Well, somewhere along the way, you and I got, some other training and some smarts in finding out that, we had met the enemy and they is us, what we really just need to do is to learn how to wake up when we're having a bad dream. And sometimes what we're going through in life is a bad dream that appears real, you know? And so if there's this opportunity to stop, kind of take stock, maybe measure what's going on and ask some qualifying questions about it, then you can say, do I want to continue being concerned and worried about this, or do I want to get on with living my life? And at the beginning, it's like training wheels to learn how to do that, or just even to be, in a position to notice when what you're doing is coming from internal forces and not from the outside world. And so you got all of the choice in the world over whatever you're creating, unless you are one of these people who say that's just the way I am. Okay.
Or you tend to blame everybody else for your current situation, which I
Right.
think is very common in our culture. It's like, and I'm not saying there aren't, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there aren't things that happen that are unjust or that, aren't fair in the world and that and have been designed as such. Like, that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
What I'm saying is that there are opportunities to look at things and think to yourself, like, and to finally, and a lot of that is what I spoke about in the beginning, like that personal attitude
Yes.
that, you know, uh, and things like that, which are basically within your control. And so, and then maybe you eventually, hopefully, you gain some wisdom, you grow up. It's kind of, I think about it as growing up. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I always use my parents as the example. Like, I remember like going through, like, when you're a teenager, and I think, whatever, or afterwards, maybe in your 20s, where everything bad that happens, it's all your parents' fault, or something. They weren't wealthy enough. They didn't have enough money. They didn't send you to this camp. They sent you to this school, whatever it was. And then all of a sudden you realize, like, it's all of a sudden you realize they're just human beings and they're doing the best. Basically, most of the time they're doing the best they can without any instructions. And so,
Yeah, I mean, you and I have a mutual friend who I really want to use him as a source of inspiration. I'm not going to use his name, but being held captive, and incarcerated for 3 to 5 years with no ever knowing that you'll ever get out. There's two or three ways you can go. You can blame the world, you can have a miserable life every single day, or you can choose to try to develop something different for yourself. And what's inspiring to me is when someone takes away your freedoms mentally, they can't. And that's really what I've heard over and over from different people who have been incarcerated. John McCain's book about being, uh, captured by the Viet Cong, in the Vietnam War for 5 years. What did he do? He decided to make a game out of it. Let's play this game called Let's See How Much I Can Make These People Do Things that they're going to hate themselves after they're done. And if you think about that, causing someone else to inflict pain upon your body and making a game out of that, that's not your average breed of cat, is it?
no, no, not at all.
But that's all about who's got control in this situation. And that's what he had to cling to, you know?
It was really interesting because I was reading some work about, by Dr. Keltner, who talks about the science of awe. And he was talking about prisoners, actually,
Yeah.
who, like, that, this ability to see awe, which, if you think about in a prison, like, what do well, if you're looking at awe as not being something like horrific, if you're looking at awe as, maybe something a little bit more positive, is like where they found it. And they said that the prisoners said it would be the way the sun would come across the yard, like in the shadows,
Yeah.
or maybe it was in the voice of, a child over the phone, and it was just this feeling of like, to me, when you're in, I can't even imagine being in a situation like that. And, to still have the whatever, the wherewithal, the perseverance, even if it's unconsciously, to look for opportunities for that. And that's also, like we're saying, like a choosing. That's a choice.
Yeah, first of all, you got to realize you can. Then you got to get good at noticing when you need to, and then you
Mhm.
got to get good at pulling the trigger. Even if
Right.
you decide to keep suffering, at least it's a decision you made. It's a choice. I'm gonna hang out here for a little while. I'm gonna see where this takes me. I'm gonna see if there's something I can learn after really embracing it and going through this nastiness. Not because I'm a bad person and I deserve it, but simply because I'm not used to this and I don't want it to dominate me in the future, being afraid of being in this position. There's just so many different ways that you can frame your choices and your decisions so that it suits you as a human being and it always brings you to a path of empowerment and gets you out of these scrapes in life where you feel like you're at the mercy of a situation.
Yeah, and I think that, I agree, and I think that it is a when you do have to realize it, um, and it's interesting, and I would actually invite everybody to try this little experiment
Mhm.
with themselves, because this is what really showed me that, I was in the same exact circumstance and went in with 2 totally different attitudes. Like, one where I went in very negative and had and that situation was a lot more challenging. And then when I went into the same exact situation with the same people, so nothing had changed except for me. Like, I was the common denominator, okay? I was the commonality in this scenario. And then going into the situation again with this attitude of like, "Oh, I'm going to everything's going to be fine. I'm going to have a good time." Whatever it was. And then afterwards, realizing the result after both, and then going into it a third time and thinking to myself, now I have a choice here. I can go in negative or I can go in positive. If I choose to be negative, that's fine. I just have to be prepared that I'm going to have a bad time or I'm not going to come home happy or whatever it is. And maybe that's where I am that day. Maybe I wanna be like, sometimes we wanna be in a bad mood. It's just like we wanna, like, just sit, we're angry or whatever. We just wanna be there for, not that we have to live there forever, but sometimes we wanna be there. And then there are other days you might say, "Well, I really don't wanna be negative and downtrodden. Like, I wanna I wanna be in a space of joy," or whatever it is. And maybe you take choice number 2. And
Yeah,
so, but it is that choice and recognizing that you have it. And so I invite everybody to and it could be something as simple as like getting up in the morning or going to work and saying, okay, I'm going to go to work today and I'm going to be in a really, like, I'm going to just have the best day. And I'm going to just get what I need to get done. I'm not going to I'm not going to get upset and see what happens. And then go to work and, I don't know, do the exact opposite and just do like a little internal experiment within yourself.
nothing better. I mean, especially when the world is not counting on you one way or the other, why not play with it? Why not have a little bit of fun? So my wife's been out of town, which I know I told you this before we got on, and she's coming back later on this afternoon. But rather than staying up and watching movies or anything like that, I've been going to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock. Well, last night I'd been up since 3:30 in the morning yesterday, and I said, "Well, I'm a little bit tired. I guess I'll go ahead and head upstairs." And I fell asleep almost immediately. And then I woke up this morning, and as I was driven by an impulse that often stimulates older people to need to wake up in the morning, and I thought to myself, do I want to get up now? I'm likely not going to be able to, to go back to sleep and wake. I mean, it was 2:30, 3:30 in the morning, and at 3:30, and so now, well, you know what? I'm just going to get up and I'm going to weigh myself, and I'm going to go downstairs and have a cup of coffee, and I'm going to grab this, this day by the butt, and I'm going to just shake it and see what we can, all those thoughts that went through my head. But the neat part of it is that I would normally suspend my need to do that thing that older people need to do in the middle of the night and go back to sleep anyway and just suppress that urge, right? Tonight, this morning, I just said, nope, I'm up. Let's go do this. I got my wife coming home today. I'm a happy clam. Let's go. Time to go and get busy. So it's if you can gamify life, and most of the time when I gamify life, I don't have an objective. I just want to play. I want to have fun. The definition of play where it's give and take without intent. There's nothing to win and nothing to lose. And the game part of it is being in that position to make the choice where you experience joy in a moment where you normally wouldn't. Or your first thought is this sucks. And then the next thought was, isn't it great? Or something along those lines.
Mhm.
But it kind
Yeah,
of comes.
yeah, I think it is, sometimes, like you said, it's as simple as that, um, and just really, it is and yeah, it's really just as simple as that, just, seeing, your life and recognizing, "Okay, well, this is how I went," or beginning to observe and get curious about what you do in life. Like, you go in and you're like, "Okay, this is my attitude today," or, "This is how I'm feeling today.
Right.
How will today unfold?" And then seeing how it goes and then saying, "Okay, well, good, bad, indifferent, ugly, whatever it is, it was, waking up the next day and doing the same."
Yeah, I love where we started this, the conversation about a series of mitzvahs, by Art Garfunkel, which started with a major mitzvah, which was to commit himself to a friend's enjoyment and normalizing what most people would consider as, this is going to end my life. I don't have vision any longer. I will not experience the world, as a fully functioning human being. And Art Garfunkel said, well, let's see about that.
Mhm. That's
And
right.
that's the kind of friendship where for the rest of their lives, neither one of them would ever have to declare that they're the other one's friend. I mean, it's just so beyond having words. It's into that area where the two people have kind of joined cosmically and energy wise that nothing could ever tear that apart.
Mhm. And that just absolutely, and I don't know that I have other words that would describe it better, but yeah, that true bonding that that they're you don't need to say anything, but that in a drop of a hat, that other person would be there for you, or the kind of people that you can speak to that you don't speak to often necessarily, but when you speak to them, no time has passed.
Yep.
It's like you pick up and it's like, "Oh my gosh, this is like, like I just saw this person or I just spoke to this person." Um, I have a dear friend who I have to admit that I'm not really good at reaching out to her. And I messaged her on Rosh Hashanah just to wish her a happy new year or whatever. And I said something and she said, "No need, no need, you know, we know that, that I love you and I love you, and vice versa. And that you love me and there's no need, kind of thing." And it was just like, that's what I'm describing. And that's what I think was shown that I would, if anything happened in her life, I would really drop it. Like I would drop it and go to her if she needed me.
Yeah.
And, one interesting thing, and I don't want to talk about this now, but when maybe we can talk about it another time because we were
Sure.
talking on Friday. I'm doing another audio event with Mary Jane, and it's on kindness and ripples of kindness, basically. And so, um, in it, we were talking about, and I think we're going to do this the following week, was, being, and people used to write me and say, oh my gosh, you're so kind. Like, thank you so much. You're so kind, or whatever. And thinking of it as just being normal. Like, to me, isn't everybody kind? For a long time, I'd be like, isn't everybody kind? Like, it just seems like it's an obvious thing. And when people are not that I do things expecting people to be kind in return. I have, like, she was like, "Oh, welcome to being like a human being." The fact that when people are not, especially if you've been kind to them,
Right.
like, what do you do with that? Because there have been points in my life when I've been really hurt by the fact that, people did not reach out, or people knew that something was going on. And and how do you handle that? It's one thing to sit there and, when you don't need somebody, or when there's nothing, when life is going status quo, or you aren't in trouble. But when you reach out and then you get no response, or the people who know don't respond, and you're kind of like, mm, you know, what happens and what do you do with that? That hurt or that pain, maybe, or whatever you want to label it as. It could be disappointment. And so I think in a few weeks we'll talk about that. But we could talk about that next week, Bill, if we're not talking about something else.
You know what? I always have a future with you. You know that. There will always, and we will never run out of things to talk about.
I know we will never run things.
Yeah. It just reminds me of my buddy who I said goodbye to last year. I still talk to him, but he's not physically around any longer. But we would get together and drive all over New England. And after being together for 9 or 10 hours, we never said, gee, I wish I'd have left a little bit earlier and dropped you off and not, been there for the last couple of hours. We never ran out of stuff to talk about. And I'm telling you, that's the way it was for 43 years, and that's it to me. It's like you and I talk about the different ways of expressing your love by I see you and that sort of thing. And there's this thing that people say, like, I got your back. Well, they don't mean they got your back. And they, other people will say, like, I got you, and maybe for you're going to get me a draft, or a hamburger or something, fine. But really great friends just say, I'm here.
I'm here.
I'm here.
Good way to close, but good way to close, Bill.
So take us home.
Oh gosh, we got you. So yeah, that's the way I feel for even all the listeners who we've never met.
Right.
I feel like we got you. Um, just know that, even if if you are feeling all alone or whatever, just know that somehow energetically we're out there supporting you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never for a moment forget we're here.
That's right.
So the last thing I would like to say, I would like to presence the fact that no matter what's going on in your life, you've got people that mean the world to you. Would you do me a favor and do them a favor, and yourself as well? Call them, email them, text them, let them know that the world works because they're out there. And that if they do need you, you're here.
Absolutely.
As we say in yoga speak, namaste.
Namaste. Yeah, absolutely. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye for now, and thank you.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.